Hello everyone, this video is going to be about my experience of never being in a relationship, why I ended up this way, and what I do to cope with it. So to provide some context about my life, I'm 22 years old, I live in my mom's house. I'm not working any job right now or making progress towards getting employed. I've never had a girlfriend, never been in an online relationship, never been on a date, never had sex, never kissed a girl, never held a girl's hand, at least in a friendly or romantic way. Though I have hugged a girl my own age, not to be too boastful. I don't feel like describing myself physically, but you don't have to guess that my appearance isn't the best considering my circumstances. So, why I've never had a relationship. Honestly, I'm willing to take some accountability here and admit that it's mostly my fault. I'm not going to start cursing God or the universe that a girlfriend won't fall from the sky and be immediately enamored with me. I'm sure many people in a similar situation are aware that men within my age bracket are lonelier than ever. I could talk about dating app statistics, the fact that fewer men aren't enrolling in college or starting professional careers, or that social media has created unrealistic standards on what to expect in young men, at least in terms of status and appearance. There are plenty more factors that you could speculate on, but I'm sure there are no shortage of videos on the internet that talk about it with greater depth and can explain the situation way better than I could. As for me, I've never used dating apps, cold approach women, or generally tried to put myself in situations where I could find a potential partner. I never really thought it was necessary. Plus, I was and still am incredibly shy, as many introverted people are. And when you're a child or teenager and start thinking about how great it'd be to have a relationship, you're often given advice of, well, you just have to be patient, you'll find someone eventually, or that the right person will come into your life. But chances of that happening now are getting slimmer thanks to the fact there aren't that many third places for people to meet in person and have organic conversations. Much of it has been replaced with the internet, and people aren't encouraged to be as authentic there, with most people just championing some ideology or framework. Though, to be fair, you could argue that's what I'm doing right now. But moving on slightly, I've never considered myself a social or outgoing person, though I've had the typical upbringing and opportunities that would have allowed me to get into a relationship. I've been through high school and college and never once even got to become friends with a girl, much less have an actual conversation with them, unless you count strictly formal exchanges or meaningless small talk. Looking back, when I had finished high school, I was thinking to myself that it wasn't a big deal that I never got a girlfriend, because hey, I have 4 more years to work on social skills, my appearance, develop myself into a more interesting, likable person. This should definitely be doable. And that's all good in theory, but when I actually got to college, the exact same feelings of fear and doubt really prevented me from actually trying to get a relationship. And it's not some great epiphany that, wow, the expectations I had weren't actually aligned with reality, and that it's much harder to put in the work to accomplish something instead of just daydreaming. And I think that's why I should have emphasized the importance of developing social skills or just putting myself into more conversations. Because the way I view it, speaking to people is like a mental muscle. If you aren't working on it at least somewhat frequently, you're going to lose your proficiency in it. So if you're a quiet and lonely child, you never really develop the skills to engage in conversations, and it's a bit of a snowball effect where by the time you reach adulthood, you barely know how to talk to anyone. And the worst part about it is that the anxiety of trying never really goes away. It takes plenty of interactions, and even when you're younger, it's obvious when someone doesn't want to even bother to look at you, much less have a conversation. I remember when I was younger in school, I would get so nervous just asking the person next to me for a pencil or if they thought the homework was difficult that day. This is all to say, if I couldn't manage myself in regular 1 minute exchanges, I already knew I never could have held a conversation with a girl that could make myself appear interesting or likable. By the time I got into college, it felt like everyone was ahead of me. They just appeared so confident and friendly. I mean, obviously, I was in my own head way too much, but it's not like I had anyone to help clarify that feeling. That's why I wanted to focus so much on my lack of communication, because it's what I've identified as the main factor in my inability to get into a relationship and more broadly make connections. At least a factor that is within my control. Like I said, I'm not going to go into my looks in this video, and I've already touched upon my lack of conventional success at my age. And this next point might sound a bit ironic coming from me, but I think that trying to improve your looks and status is a bit overrated advice when it comes to getting into a relationship. I do think they're talked a lot about as solutions because they're tangible in nature. Like you can quantify how much money you have, and looks are a bit more subjective, but there are objective facial features that signal attraction if you're going off of contemporary Western beauty standards. And this is going to sound a bit cringe or naive, but I believe women really value things like emotional intelligence, being more empathetic, and actively listening. But since social skills are a much more dynamic and abstract thing to improve upon, it doesn't get the same amount of coverage as the previous things. I think it also ties into the whole stereotypical attitude of guys need to be tough and suppress their emotions. And to be honest, I'm a bit compliant in this because even though I have a couple of guy friends, I'm not really comfortable expressing my loneliness and lack of relationship experience. I don't think they would be too judgmental, but my issue is the advice they would give would most likely be generic, like just be yourself, go to the gym, and go on dating apps. So, to wrap up this part of the video, I'm basically a coward who has never had the courage to practice my social skills, meaning I've never had the confidence to approach or befriend a woman, meaning I've never had the chance for a relationship to happen, meaning I'm dying alone and it's over. Yeah, so now I want to pivot a bit from my very intellectual analysis of my own shortcomings and talk about what I personally do to cope with my loneliness. If I wanted to be all meta and appease the YouTube algorithm, I'd probably make this section into a tier list, but unfortunately for you, you just have to deal with this unordered mess. And as a disclaimer, please don't take any of this as advice. I don't have experience with all of these things, but I imagine some of these can have long term detrimental mental and physical consequences for you if you become dependent on them. So the first one I have is porn, and yes, I'm saying porn. I don't care about this channel making money or becoming successful or whatever. I mean, do I really have to go into detail? It's basically the perfect cope for loneliness. You get infinite novelty, so you can pretty much satisfy any ungodly desire you have. And as long as you're someone who has an inkling of self respect and isn't going to develop an unhealthy parasocial relationship with a specific creator, it's basically free. I will say for porn, it's going to give you the most dopamine out of these, but because of its addictive nature and negative psychological and even physical effects, unless you're completely ready to give up on finding love, it's best to avoid this. And next up, we have masturbation. Honestly, I don't have that much to say about this one because for me and the experiences of many others, it's nearly unthinkable to separate this from porn. I will say there are some physical and mental benefits to masturbating that you can look up if you really want to justify this, but overall, it's a better cope than watching porn. I mean, you can still get addicted to it, but there aren't the same negative mental consequences. This next one I personally don't use much these days, but we got girlfriend slash mommy ASMR or any other kind of roleplay videos. I view this as a contrast to porn because instead of satisfying sexual desire, it's fulfilling a more romantic and emotional need. I mean, there are erotic ASMR videos, but I would categorize that under porn. These are generally supposed to be more wholesome. I think this might have been the best cope I've used. It certainly helps alleviate some stress or sadness around your loneliness. A potential con is that it's going to give you an unrealistic expectation of what a relationship should be like because the person in the video is putting all the effort in, which is just the nature of a one-sided conversation. But I guess as long as you can differentiate that and realize it's fantasy, then I guess go ahead. Another one of my personal favorites is VTubers. If you don't know what those are, the way I would describe them, they're basically the evolved form of real female streamers because they're actually entertaining and relatable, or at least that's what I tell myself, all while keeping a good visual appeal for their predominantly male audience. Hopefully, most people are sensible enough to not get overly attached to VTubers, because if you do, you're kind of fucked twice. Because not only are you attached to someone who doesn't notice you, but they're likely playing a character or overly exaggerating parts of their existing personality for the sake of viewer engagement. This next one is a bit more abstract. We got excessive and prolonged daydreaming. For me, this stems from consuming a bunch of the media I mentioned previously, which was primarily the ASMR roleplay, and then using that as fuel for these incredibly elaborate scenarios in my head where I have the perfect girlfriend. If you're not a very creative or imaginative person, then this one might not do it for you. Also, I think this one can be quite harmful, especially if your life is shit, because you're going to be retreating into this fantasy more often. And to reference the roleplay example, it's just going to set you up for disappointment should you be lucky enough to get into a real relationship. Now I'm going to be talking about some stuff that I never tried but I might be open to, so take my opinion even less seriously if that's even possible. So this first one, we got talking to AI slash chatbot girlfriends. I'm not trying to sound too judgmental, but I feel like you have to be a bit schizo to do this on a regular basis. I mean, at least if you're paying for OnlyFans or donating to a streamer, they're real people, but you are losing out on that direct and instant communication, which I guess this is providing. I feel like the only way to treat this as a cope is to be fully committed to the roleplay or fantasy. Otherwise, I think most people are going to be too self aware to engage with this. Honestly, it sounds pretty bad, but this might be me in a couple months if I start to go crazy from boredom. So, this next cope we have is e dating. I do want to clarify this is different from a long distance relationship. I think those are valid and wish the best for any couples doing that. But from my view, e dating is just an elaborate role play of what a relationship should be, where one or both parties are just trying to get some of the surface level benefits of being in a real relationship, like praise, compliments, or just general positive attention. But my perception of this is likely warped a bit because I've never known anybody who's e dated and I just see stuff from social media. Another one we have is prostitution or escorts. I mean, I can't even do this one because it's literally illegal in my country. But even if it wasn't, I don't think I'd be able to go through with this because I feel like the experience would be so awkward and uncomfortable that it would take any physical pleasure I'd feel out of it. And that's what it is. It's just purely physical pleasure because the girl or whoever there doesn't care about you and would rather have the experience be over. Yeah, I think I'd rather e-date than do this one because I can at least pretend the other person cares about me. All right, I'm running out of steam here, so my last one is going to be going to therapy and actually talking through your problems with a professional. Okay, guys, in all seriousness, I think that'll be it for this video. I apologize for the second half of this being utter slop, but I'm just not smart enough to extract any kind of wisdom or insight from this stuff, so I'm leaving now. Goodbye.